thank you, Aline. Thank you, Professor, for hosting us at this event and giving us this opportunity to enter into a dialogue with you about effectuation. But before I begin, I also want to acknowledge my friend Rose here from Sao Paulo, Patty from Bolivia, and Mary Isabella, the love of my life. Yes. I mentioned the ladies here because we have been part of a conversation that has been amazing, that has led us to this moment as well, right? So I want to thank everybody who supported the event with this conversation between us who are researchers, educators, and now we are just simply co-creators in some ways. So I just want to acknowledge. And where is Bruno? Okay, maybe he's got to make a call or something. So Bruno is another old friend, the founder of 100 Open Schools. When he was just finishing up his PhD, so I just wanted to acknowledge him for coming here today as well. So I have about 30 minutes. Who is going to keep the time? Otherwise, I will start talking. We will be here till midnight. So somebody has to keep the time. Give me like a 5-minute warning. That would be good. I also have an opportunity later in the evening to do a full masterclass. So today in the morning, what you are going to get is just a preview, right? And then if you want to see the main movie, right, let's ask them for something. What would you like? They have beyond registration. They think if they have registered, it's free. It's not free, right? Adina is like, what is she doing? I am just trying to get you guys going here a little bit. To get started, for me to understand a little bit more who you are, I want to keep this as interactive as possible, even if it's only like 20 to 30 minutes. So my first question to you is, please raise your hand if you are currently an entrepreneur starting or running a company. Okay, so a few entrepreneurs. So please raise your hand if you are in education in some way. You're a professor, researcher, educator. Okay. Few more of, oh, now I can go full research if I want to, it looks like. All right, but we can go wherever you want to go. How about raise your hand if you're involved in policy, ecosystem, basically supporting entrepreneurship in some way. And some of you might be doing two things through thinking. Okay, now, if there is somebody I missed, you need to tell me who you are. If you're none of these three things, what are you? Okay, everybody is one of these three things. Okay, very good. So I have a short presentation, as I said, a preview that will give you the summary of what we are doing in effectuation research, but often entrepreneurship research. But I also have a little supplementary thing. If people interested in policy and ecosystems want to know about it, just a couple of slides in a different presentation. But if you want it, and if we have time for it, you can ask, and then I will just switch over. But I want to tell you ahead of time that if I do the minute, it's switching over. So this one is going to be primarily like a summary of lessons from expert entrepreneurs. And to keep it interactive, I'll start with a couple of questions, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my background in the research, and then give you the summary of the research here. So, okay, let's get started. Here is my first question. So again, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Think about this question. Is the world today more or less uncertain than October 19? Why October 19? Because that is around the time the pandemic hit, even though some of us woke up only in February of 2020 that there is a pandemic. That's around the time the pandemic hit. So raise your hands if you think the world is more uncertain today. All right. Most people. Raise your hands if you think the world is less uncertain today. It's you and me, is it? tell me a little bit about why do you think it is less uncertain?
Actually,
Yeah.
change on the way people relate.
Yeah, something very fundamental to human beings, and we have to relearn now. So you think that makes it a little bit interesting, but we are also connecting in a different way, and that is the positive side. So as you can imagine, this is kind of a trick question, right? It is a trick question because we think that uncertainty is something that we can know, right? That today is more, and we think in terms of more and less. And a lot of the things that I've been talking about in effectual entrepreneurship challenges that idea. The quantification of uncertainty and the idea that we can know in advance whether it is uncertain or not, right? So the idea is that it is always uncertain. What made it uncertain in October 2019 was that we did not know the pandemic was going to hit. Do we know something is going to happen tomorrow or tonight? We don't know. So there is one kind of uncertainty which all our cleverness and all our institutions and everything can never completely get rid of. And effectuation or effectual entrepreneurship is the idea of making decisions in a reasonable and systematic way, knowing that the future is always fundamentally uncertain. Doesn't matter how secure you feel, that can be uncertainty. This acceptance of uncertainty, this embrace of uncertainty, and then using uncertainty and tackling it to build new things. That is at the heart of effectuation. So that's one of the things that we're going to tell you about. And I get a lot of credit, and thanks to Alini, my face is everywhere in 1,000 different places. But the fact is that a lot of this work comes from the entrepreneur themselves. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So before we go think about it, one of the reasons we think that we can measure uncertainty, right, in quantity, more and less, that we can predict how uncertain it is and how uncertain it will be, all of that actually comes from a scientific mindset. And the scientific method, science itself, has been the engine driving a lot of positive things that have happened in the last 200 years or so, since the book Novum Organum by Francis Bacon came out, right? But the idea of science is you can understand the world in a systematic way. And why do you need to understand the world? Because you can then make better predictions. And when you can predict better, you have more control over outcome. And all of that is true. It is powerful. And I'm a huge, huge fan of science, right? I grew up, science was my emancipation coming out. But it turns out that there is an equally powerful but different method. That is the entrepreneurial method, right? And the entrepreneurial method is about reshaping the world. Science cannot tell you what you should want. So how do we decide what is worth pursuing? What kinds of worlds we want to build? And so science can tell you what kinds of world you can and cannot build. But entrepreneurship is about figuring out a systematic way to do things that are actually worth doing, including things that we are not even dreaming of today. And so we're going to talk about this a little bit as well. So this is kind of the high-level summary of the insights that have come from this research. And I always like to start with the high level. And I tell this to my entrepreneurship students all the time. Bottom line first, and then you go deeper, and then deeper, and you get into more detail. So that's what I'm doing, starting at a very large bird's eye view. So now let's look at how is this connected to the lessons from expert entrepreneurs. So a word about the research, since so many of you are interested in research as well. So I have been an entrepreneur. My first identity is as an entrepreneur. I've co-founded 5 ventures. I've done business in India, actually first one in Germany, in India and in Singapore. And having been in the trenches building different businesses, I was beginning to realize that there is a lot of things in entrepreneurship that is actually teachable and learnable, and yet we don't have good ways of teaching entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs are just thrown out into the school of hard knocks, and they have to learn from life. Whereas I felt through my experience, I had this intuition that there is a lot of things that we can and should be teaching. And then I had the opportunity to come to the United States to do research and build educational programs in entrepreneurship. So I had a very practical question for my dissertation research, which is what should we be teaching and what is actually teachable and learnable? And you have to start with what is it that entrepreneurs actually learn, right? So the study was a study of expertise, and I'm using the word in a technical terms, the way we use it in cognitive science. I was at Carnegie Mellon University, where they had literally invented ways of understanding expertise in 200 different domains. That is what led to the field of artificial intelligence. So my advisor, Herbert Simon, is actually considered one of the fathers of artificial intelligence, because Simon and Newell wrote the very first book on human problem solving, where they literally figured out a way to think about how does the human brain process and information and make decisions, and can we program that into a computer? And then when you try to program something into the computer and what doesn't work, tells you something about how the human brain works. So he became this professor of computer science and psychology. They went back and forth between the brain and computer, and starting with studies of chess in particular, right? And in studying expertise, they invented a method called the Think Aloud Verbal Protocols. And this is a method, instead of coming and asking you are an expert in your subject, I could interview you, and if you're kind, I could do a very long, in-depth interview or multiple interviews. I can ask you, how did you do things and why do you do things this way? So this is one method. But this method goes one level deeper. It allows me to look inside your head. And how do I do that? Not with CAT scans, which we can do it today, but we couldn't do in the 60s. Instead, what I would do is I would come to you and give you a problem from your domain of expertise. So let's say you're a chess grandmaster. I will ask you to actually play chess, except while you're playing the chess, I will ask you to talk continuously. Non-stop, you have to talk. And what you say is my data, right? So let me give you a simple example. If I ask you to multiply 24 by 32, and I say no pen, no paper, and you have to talk continuously as you do it. Do you want to do it? Oh my God, it's a lot of people. But come with me for a minute. If somebody is willing to, I didn't mean physically come. We don't have that much. We'll do that in the evening. So the idea here, though, is if I ask you to do that, very often the way people will do it, they'll close their eyes, they'll imagine 24 times 32, and they'll start 4 times 2, 2 times 2. That's what. So this allows me to look not whether you can do the arithmetic. This is not a test, right? I can tell you where you went to school and when. Why? Because we teach arithmetic differently. Different people do arithmetic differently in different places at different points in time. So the idea here is I can see what you are looking at, what you're not looking at, what you're confused about, how you go from A to B to C to arrive at a decision. And that is basically the idea of this research. And I got to define an expert entrepreneur using the definitions from the literature on expertise. People who have 15 years or longer, full-time, immersive experience, starting not just one company, but multiple companies, including successes and failures, and at least one company public. There are only 245 people who qualified. And I wrote to all 245, and 45 people agreed to participate in the study. and I used this think aloud protocol methods. I had them do a 17-page problem set of 10 typical decisions that all startup entrepreneurs have to make. So this is just, as I said, a glimpse of the original research from which the effectuation principles came. Since then, in the last 25 years, I'm in denial. I have to stop saying 20 years. I used to say 20 years. It's like 25 years. Many other people have come in. There are many versions of this research, comparison groups. There are people have looked at R&D managers inside large company. Everything you can imagine, and hundreds of case studies from about 54 countries the last time we checked. So I'm just giving you a glimpse of the original study, but a lot of, as I said, I get credit for everything everybody does. So I am including stuff that other people have done in my presentation. So, okay. So based on all of this stuff, what do we know? What are these people expert in? Of course, they're expert in starting and running a company. That is one practical answer. But it turns out that they are also experts in dealing with this problem space. When the future is fundamentally unknowable, not just unknown, unknowable, when your goals are not very clear, right? When you're in an unknowable future, it's kind of difficult if you're tied to goal. And information is, I just used a technical term here, I'll explain it in a simple way, isotropic, in the sense that you go and talk to different people and different people with you. The problem is not that you don't have enough information. Even though the future is unknowable, you get a lot of information from different people who all think differently about where the future is going. And you don't know what is relevant and what is not relevant, because there is way too much information and you still don't know which one is relevant. And effectuation is a set of 5 principles, and it's a logic that solves all 3 problems at once and systematically. And that is the bottom line here. Now let's say, okay, that is again one level lower than the scientific. Oh my God, I got only 5 minutes. No. I understand this is Brazil. It's kind of like India. We call it IST, Indian Stretchable Time, right? But in actual fact, But I do. I mean, I've given you enough. Hopefully, I've mentioned your appetite. So the finding is that is kind of an inverse thing, right? The standard model we teach people, to the extent that you can predict the future, you can control it. These expert entrepreneurs, through their experience, are learning that to the extent you can control the future, you don't need to predict it. So one of the things you will notice is all the principles of effectuation are about minimizing prediction, trying to make decisions without predicting. Okay? So how do you control a future you cannot predict? Another even more detailed bottom line, you turn control itself into a strategy. So you work with things within your control, ignore things that are not out in your control. So you're always working with things within your control, and you're working with whoever wants to work with you. So you work with self-selected stakeholders. And what are you trying to do? You're not trying to predict the future. You're trying to co-create it. You're shaping it, transforming it, making it. Okay? So the first thing to notice here is that these expert entrepreneurs have taken the standard logic, prediction leads to control, which means there is only a point, right, a vanishing point between the relationship between prediction and control. They've taken that and they've blown it up into a space. So what you get instead is this prediction control space. And this is the space in which all kinds of levels of uncertainty, all kinds of levels of isotropy can all work, right? And traditionally, there are 3 quadrants in which we have a lot of knowledge and we teach, right? The top one is the high prediction, high control, which is like a visionary strategy. Come up with a great idea and then persist like hell until it happens. Right? Or you can do the opposite. In technology, especially things like IT, in Silicon Valley, you have this idea that you're going to be nimble, you're going to change all the time, you're going to pivot, you're going to react very quickly. So this is low in prediction and low in control. And this is what we do in business schools, where we teach you to all kinds of techniques of prediction. And I'm smiling, but the fact is all of those toolboxes are important and necessary. And you'll see the idea here is to mix and match. But the reason I'm showing you these three is we know a lot of stuff about this and we do teach. But until about 20 years ago, we had virtually nothing in the bottom right-hand quadrant, which is low in prediction, high in control. And that is what we have been developing over the last 20 years. So now I'll come to the actual practical level of the bottom line, which is the 5 principles. So I'm going to give you 5 principles, and you can see that every one of them is a way of working with control as a strategy without having to predict the future. So the first one is the bird in hand principle, which is basically the idea that you don't have to have a clear, specific goal. In fact, very often, even when you have a clear and specific goal, you don't know what the heck to do. So here it says, instead of being tied to a goal, be tied to your means. Start with what is already within your control, and you ask yourself, what kind of goals can I create? What kinds of goals are worth doing? And we're thinking about very simple things in the early stage, right? So you just start with the means in hand, and you actually start becoming creative on the side of the goals. So once you come up with, some goals that you might want to pursue, or you might not have any goals at all. Here are just some things that I can do, and you start doing it. The next inversion that happens is traditionally we look at expected return as the way to decide between 2 or 3 projects, right? In fact, in finance, they teach you to project future cash flows and future risks, and then calculate the risk-adjusted net present value of future returns, right? Which is you're trying to predict the best you can, and you're making it risk-adjusted, and then you the expert entrepreneurs. Remember, these are expert entrepreneurs who built multiple companies, including one company at least that they took public. So these are very, very experienced people. And they are saying, I don't believe in expected return. It can be anything. Who knows? It will be infinite. It might be. So I don't particularly. In fact, one guy actually said, my investors always ask me, what is your exit strategy? You know what? It's a stupid question. I'll tell you my exit strategy. You and I are going to make a boatload of money. That's the exit strategy, right? Now let's think about how we do that, right? And so the idea is, don't worry about expected return, but make sure you're investing no more than you can afford to lose. So this is a whole other way of keeping the downside within your control, but the way you think about it, that you're saying, what can I afford to lose, also makes you think about upside differently. The kinds of projects you want to do very differently. The next inversion happens so if you're going to build a venture effectually, clearly you can't go around telling investors, here's a brilliant new idea and you're going to make so much money, so come invest. You cannot do that. Targeting particular stakeholders becomes much harder. So what the expert entrepreneurs do is this thing called the crazy quilt, which is you talk to anybody and everybody, and you talk to them in such a way that they start thinking about making commitments to your venture, right? So it's all about partnering. You're not doing competitive analysis. You're not targeting markets. You're not targeting investors. You're trying to build partnerships with anybody who wants to work. That's why it's a crazy quilt, right? Because you don't know who your partner is going to be. But the idea is to structure the deal in such a way that it becomes affordable last for you to do the next step. And you want to make sure the other person also is not investing more than they can afford to do. So there is a lot here. I mean, last 7 years, I have been looking just inside that box. Today is only preview, so I can't get into all the details. But along the way, even if you decide to ignore the unexpected things are going to happen. Things outside your control are going to hit you. And so these expert entrepreneurs look at negative things also always as a positive. So the idea is they become very good at things. The moment something bad happens, they ask, okay, now that this bad thing has happened, what can I do that I couldn't do before? And the idea is always focusing on what action, or not just reaction, but action. So you see lemonade when life throws lemons at you. And the most important, of course, so you're not avoiding surprises, you embrace them and leverage them. The last, most important, is the pilot in the plane. And the whole idea here is this philosophy that the future can be made. It is not out there for us. It's not a bunch of trends that you predict and ride. You can do that too, but the future can also be made, irrespective of what the trends say. So the future comes from what human beings choose to do. History does not run on autopilot. What you and I choose to do reshapes it. And so the idea is to approach every single person that you interact with as a pilot in their own plane, right? It's not like they're not passengers in your plane, right? That's the way you have to. Okay, so this is kind of the second last slide. What I'm going to do here is to put this into motion, into a process, right? So same principles, but you will see how it happens over time. So you start with your means, and the means that the expert entrepreneurs talked about were: who am I, what do I know, and whom do I know? So you just start with that, and you ask yourself, what can I do for affordable loss? And you get to decide what your affordable loss is. This is a completely subjective thing. It's what you feel is within your control. But this is just day one. Day two, you start interacting with other people. And when you're interacting with other people, what are you trying to do? You're not just gathering information and advice, but it's okay, you can gather information and advice, but remember, all of that is prediction. What you're really trying to do is to get people to commit something so your next step becomes affordable loss for you. So that gives control, right? So you're trying to get commitments from people. And every time you get commitments, sometimes people will not give you commitments, they'll only give you advice. But any advice that comes with commitments trumps advice that comes without commitments, unless the advice is something you can just implement within your affordable loss. So anyway, but every time you get a commitment, of course, you get some new means, right? It creates this expanding cycle. But the most important new means you get is the actual relationship, right? So it becomes who we are. So your entire bird in hand changes, because now it's who we are, what we know, and whom we know. But your goals also start changing, because good people with valuable resources are not going to commit to your venture or your vision of your venture. They're going to commit to their vision of your venture. And I can give you example after example. And their vision may be different from yours. And you have to stitch together that crazy quilt. How do you marry their vision with yours? It's one of the most difficult things that entrepreneurs struggle with. The smartest of my students struggle with this. So I can talk for hours just on that. But in any case, the new goals start emerging. But the new goals can also become like a converging cycle on what we can and cannot do, because every time you enter into a relationship, you are also entering into a commitment. And as this process continues, of course, lemons get thrown at you. So, and the surprises that can be positive or negative, they will impact your bird in hand and your affordable loss as well. But so long as the process continues, the process itself leads you not just to new products or new markets. It can lead to new futures that nobody predicted in this process. Okay? So now the final actual bottom line, right? What are the implications from this model for performance? And I'm just going to state it and leave it for discussion. The first thing is, it's not about just the probability of success. So people routinely, investors especially routinely ask me, so if somebody builds a venture effectually, are they going to be more successful? And I'm like, okay, let me tell you the real news, and then you can figure out how to make it into a good news, right? So the real news is that success and failure can still happen, especially at the firm level, right? But if success happens, we can say that if you're building the venture, if you're investing, we've done studies with investors as well. If you're building the venture effectually, you are much more likely to come up with something innovative, even when you're not setting out to be innovative, right? Innovation is just built into the process. Similarly, if you fail, your failure, oh, sorry. If you fail, nobody loses more than they can afford to lose. So the cost of failure is reduced. So whether you succeed or whether you fail, there are special benefits when you build the venture effectually. Most important being that if you're able to keep the failure within people's affordable loss, you get many more shots at the pot. At the same time, you're also building relationships with these stakeholders that allows you to do the next thing and the next thing. So that just keeps the network of possibilities actually increase even when you're failed. So as I said, you can convert this into thing. So Alina tells me I have 2 minutes. So would you like to see just one example of this? And then we'll go to, so let me, okay. So since this is FINEP and there are people involved in technology and everything, and I assume from the presentation that Mauricio did, which was very useful, thank you, that is a kind of a Silicon Valley taste to what you are trying to do. So I thought I'll give you an example from Silicon Valley. And the interesting thing I'm going to do here is I am literally using the slide deck that Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky used in their presentation. This was on TechCrunch. I literally just downloaded. So the pictures and the slides are directly from them, and you can just see the principle. I just put the principle on it, and I've shared it with them too. So here you go. So this is the story of Airbnb. So people think, oh, what a brilliant idea. Well, not really, right? Because they started because they couldn't pay their rent in their San Francisco apartment. They looked around and they said, oh, but we have an extra room in this very expensive city, and we have this sad-looking mattress. And they said, why don't we just put up a website saying this is available and see who shows up? And of course, you can imagine that nobody thinks it's a great idea at that point in time. And there are jokes that people make, there are things called hotels, and who wants to come and stay there? But the thing is, it costs them nothing to put up a website, and they already have that extra space. So who do you think? They put airbeds, and they decided we are going to do fresh cooked breakfast, which I always joke. I like to make fun of my my fellow citizens in the US, that American breakfast means they will actually heat up the milk for your cereal, maybe, right? So they say front breakfast, they make cereal, basically. So they said, so who will come and stay here? Somebody came and said, Amol, right? Therefore, they put up a bag on this side, and they got the first customer, Amol. And you can imagine, who's this Amol? Why would he want? Well, you can easily imagine, for some reason, he wants like really cheap accommodation in San Francisco, and he doesn't care if it is just a mattress in somebody's bedroom. So now they're very excited. Right? You have proof of concept. So you have a business. Well, that's not that easy. So they go crazy in some ways. They say, okay, now we have a business. So they go try to get a professional website, like something that is very good. So they say, we have this, brilliant engineer, former roommate. Let's get him to build a proper website for us. Now, of course, everybody is going to be knocking on the door. They didn't quite realize that you also have to have enough bedrooms, right? So it's a two-sided platform. You got to get people to put their bedrooms up on the website, and you need people who are renting it. And that is not an easy business, I'm sure all of you know, because it's a chicken and egg problem. Anyway, they get into that problem, but they're enthusiastic, and they bought enough cereal boxes, so they are expecting guests to come every day, every night. But of course, that doesn't happen. So they are left with a lot of cereal boxes. So what do? So this is around the time of the Democratic National Convention, 2008. So it's McCain versus Obama. So they decide what they do. I forgot to put the pictures of the pictures of the cereal boxes are really hilarious. They basically take Captain Crunch and then they turn it into Captain McCain Crunch, and then the Cheerios into Obama O's. Right? They literally put the print out labels and put it on the cereal container and they go and sell them. But because it's a Democratic National Convention, people are willing to pay. People are paying money for hats and buttons and T-shirts. So this just seems curious. And so a lot of people buy the boxes. So they sell 500 boxes of cereal at $40 a box. That is their seed funding, right? So they get $30,000 from the Democratic National Convention. But most importantly, this is, people are like, what are you doing? These are cereal boxes, and newspapers are interviewing them. They're asking, like, is it even allowed, right? Like, what about intellectual property? They don't care. It's affordable loss for them. They have the cereal boxes anyway. But it creates a lot of PR. It creates a lot of buzz as well. And as a result of that, they're able to join Y Combinator. Till that moment, they're actually calling the company Air, Bed, and Breakfast. And what is the first thing that Y Combinator teaches them? And Paul Graham was running Y Combinator at the time. And Paul Graham is one of the most effectual. I mean, you should read his blogs. They are like my expert entrepreneurs talking, right? Anyway, so Paul, the Y Combinator makes them change the name to Airbnb, and they also introduce them to Sequoia, who gives them a little bit of funding, but still no traction. You can see how much time is going by. So then Paul tells them, you know what? You guys have to stop mucking around just with the website and the technology. Get on a plane. Go to New York City. Why New York City? Because that is where all the apartments are. You need to get a whole bunch of good apartments signed up on your site instead of just simply working on the website. So this is what I call shoe leather, right? They get on a plane, they start knocking. Apartment by apartment, they're knocking on New York City and saying, please, come to our website. We're trying to do this business. And a lot of people, most people are just closing the door on your face. But some people are willing to put up the bedrooms, but they're not renting. But then they start noticing that the bedrooms that look better are renting. You'll think, oh, you didn't need to do that to understand that. But still, sometimes that's how you learn. But how do you make beautiful pictures of apartments that everybody wants to rent? So then they start talking to photographers in New York City and say, can you come and stage these bedrooms and take beautiful pictures so people will want to rent them? And the photographers in New York City are artists. Why would they want to come and take pictures of your bedrooms? Right? There's a whole other issue there. And you can see now the cycle hitting again. So they say, what is it that we can do for you? What would it take for you to come make pictures of bedrooms? And it turns out, what is it that these two people have that that photographers don't have? These people can do technology. So they build a photography platform for marketing the photographers. This is actually the first successful venture because the photography platform becomes a successful, and photographers, out of sheer sort of generosity and gratitude, they say, okay, I'll come stage the bedroom for you. And the rest, as they say, is history, right? So, as I told you, every one of those pictures slides straight from their slides. I only put the text is mine, but even the story text is theirs, right? I just put the principle on each one of them. And this is, of course, kind of history at this point. So I'm going to stop here. I don't know if we have time. Should I take one or two questions, or should we jump into the panel? I don't want to make the whole thing terribly delayed. And we will have time for a conversation later in the evening, as I said, and we do the master class, which will be much more interactive, and you get to speak, especially since I've given the preview. I don't want to go over everything again, hopefully. So if you have a couple of questions, maybe we can take, let me wear the earphones. Or a lot of people are not using the earphones, so that I'm assuming you know English or something. No, it's okay. I will bear it. Okay. Whoever has a question.
Alguém tem alguma pergunta para fazer? Olha. Hello. Pode falar em português.
Olá. Hello. Bom dia. Whatever.
Aqui no Brasil, eu ensino na universidade a disciplina de estratégia organizacional. E a gente tem o hábito de utilizar as escolas americanas de estratégia, principalmente a escola do posicionamento, que é uma escola prescritiva de estratégia, ou seja, ela faz exatamente o oposto daquilo que o Effectuation coloca. E a gente tem lá o professor Michael Porter, que está lá em Harvard, e que continua fazendo seus vídeos, está lá no seu instituto. E a gente observa que quando um pequeno empreendedor, e alguns alunos meus são pequenos empreendedores, vão para o Sebrae e outras escolas para aprender negócio, a primeira coisa que eles aprendem é a base da escola prescritiva da administração. E aí, o que a senhora gostaria de falar sobre isso?
Go Porter! So here's what we want to understand. For a long time, right, that was the state of the art because we had not done the research. We thought entrepreneurship is small business or early stage business, but it's just business. So Porter ought to apply to businesses. So we taught that. And that is why this research was important. And that is why we decided we want to win the academic battle, right? So we did the right way. It took a long time to complete the research and publish it. It took years and to build all the comparative samples and everything like that. But the idea here is the first thing to remember is it's not first of all, I agree with you that Porter is almost the exact opposite of effectuation. But that is what the data shows, right? The expert entrepreneurs are literally inverting it. It's not that they're saying we won't do Porter, but we'll do whatever we want. So effectuation is not intuition. It is not just doing whatever you want, right? It is an actual systematic inversion of it. So for every A, there is an I1 over A principle, right? So it's literally inverted. And the reason it inverts is I showed you the 2 by 2. Right? Porter is very useful on the top left causal situation, high in prediction, low in control. It's a very useful tool. And good entrepreneurs have to learn tools in all 4, right? Because you're not only going to start a company, you're going to run it. For example, every time you make a commitment, you have to be a little bit causal. You have to plan. You have to actually deliver on your commitment. So it's not a question of this is wrong, this is right. There is a reason the expert entrepreneurs are learning the opposite lesson. Why? Because they are dealing with the unknowable future, uncertain goals, and also the isotropic information. So they are living in a different problem part of the space, and so they are learning different lessons, which gives us a different toolkit in some ways. To do, right? So the way you want to think about is teach students about the space and which tool is useful under which space. The only interesting addition to that is to say, what if you don't know where you are in the space? And I asked that question to expert entrepreneurs as well. And then they will say, then would you rather assume the future is predictable and then it turns out your predictions didn't work, which is 9 out of 10 VC funded firms fail, right? That kind of thing. Or do you want to believe that the future is actually fundamentally unpredictable, and it turns out that the future is actually predictable? You could make that, just choose your mistake. And the expert entrepreneurs say, I choose the other mistake. I choose to believe the future is fundamentally unknowable and unpredictable, and build things effectually, because if it is predictable, I will know very quickly, because everybody will be investing, and so I will get a lot of affordable loss money. So then I can use Porter very happily. So that's what the expert entrepreneurs would tell me. But this is, as I said, this is not Sarah's sitting in her bathtub dreaming up a theory. There is a lot, it comes straight from the data, and it's all inductive findings.
All right. He did a very clever question.
Yeah.
Knowing Porter is very important to do effectiveness.
Yeah. Well, sorry. But that's an interesting question. What do you mean by better?
Better is better.
Oh,
excuse me. I think what he said is a very clever question. It's very important, in my vision, knowing well Porter.
Of course, I
If
agree.
you don't know well Porter, my understanding, it's difficult to understand effectiveness. If you understand well Porter, you can understand better effectiveness and work better with your knowledge.
Sure. So what I'm trying to say is all four quadrants are important, right? So tools in all four quadrants are
I think
important.
one, not substitute, you know.
Exactly. It's not a question of substitute. You can mix and match though. It's not a question of substitute.
This is what I-
Yeah. The advantage is when you learn to mix and match. Absolutely. It's not a substitute.
You need to match.
Yeah, absolutely. But you also have to look at the dangers of each space.
Oh, well,
Right? If you take Porter, and Porter is so well known and everywhere. I mean, there's the Harvard aura is there everywhere, and everybody teaches it. So people think that that is the most important thing. Now we can also learn this other stuff, and the data from expert entrepreneurs is showing the opposite. That's all I'm trying to say. That you have, if you for entrepreneurs, and think about it this way: the engineering. So let's take a car, right? The engineering that goes into getting that when you turn the key in your thing and get the ignition fired up and getting it out of your garage, that's a whole other kind of engineering than how the kind of engineering you need when you drive on the freeway. Right? So Porter is not about getting your car out of the garage. Porter is very useful to make sure you don't get into an accident if you drive and get there. You want, effectively, fast, however you want to, depending on whether you're with your family, whether you're in a sports car. That is all very good. But getting that thing out of the garage, Porter is actually a hindrance. That is what I am trying to argue. So it's not either or. You know where you are and what you're trying to do and use the tools appropriately.
if you think about assembly line of cars, if you think about line assembly of cars, you need to know Porter well. You need to understand to do breeze.
If you have an assembly line of cars, you ain't an entrepreneur.
No, why not?
For the simple reason that you already have a lot of things,
Oh,
right?
okay.
That are now, if you have an assembly line of cars that are running on petrol, and now you think I got to do electrical.
No, but
No.
when you say it's assembly line of cars, it's every day changing. Every day they are changing.
Everything is
the map
changing in a predictable way, though.
Yeah.
You can plan the whole thing ahead of time.
Well, that's just-
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I said this is a preview.
Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to spend time getting into details. And as I said, there is about 25 years of all kinds of work here. So I can also point to papers if you want, things like that. Absolutely.
Any questions?
In the interest of time, maybe.
Opa.
Sara, tudo bem? Sara, eu tenho uma pergunta.
Yeah.
Eu tenho uma pergunta que até se correlaciona um pouco com essa discussão. A lógica causal que vem do pensamento neoclássico às vezes é enxergada como uma contraposição da lógica do Effectuation. E quando a gente fez algumas pesquisas aqui no Brasil, olhando para os negócios sociais e como eles absorvem essa lógica, a gente começou a entender que, na verdade, existe momentos onde tem mais effectuation ou mais causalidade na forma como você desenvolve o gerenciamento das coisas. Você consegue enxergar um padrão entre a quantidade de recurso e como isso interfere entre uma lógica mais causal, mais efeitual, ou outros tipos de fatores que vão desencadear essas correlações entre as lógicas ao longo do desenvolvimento do empreendimento?
You're absolutely correct. There are quite a few studies that show that. I'd love to see your study as well. The question of when, this is what I'm saying, you're navigating that entire space almost on a daily basis. So you have to know where you are in the space and then use the tool that is appropriate. In fact, one of my colleagues did a study of that as well. Like how good are people with different backgrounds and different experiences? How good are people? And the question was just two things. How good are you at knowing where you are in the space? So this was an experiment he did. and how good are you at matching your strategy to the space in which you are, right? So you need both skills, because sometimes you know where you are, but you still think, effectuation will apply everywhere, or portal will apply everywhere, or, agile or lean will apply everywhere. And so you have to get both of these two things right. But the issue really is, as I mentioned, if you don't know where you are, which error would you rather make? Which error is less expensive is something you can think about. But the point about literally you're living in that in that prediction control space, right? So knowing where you are and matching strategy, and then to be creative, you have to mix and match as well. And there's some good research coming out on that also, how you mix and match. So I'd love to see your study. I'm glad you spoke up. This is what I mean. I will get all credit for his study too, So it's very unfair. But a lot of the things I'm saying are coming from people like that, collecting data in the field. Thank you so much. I think this is a good moment too.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.